Prison gang leader Bullies' quiet inmate has no idea. He's a retired kung fu master. The cafeteria at Riverside State Penitentiary went dead silent. Vincent "Razor" Caruso, 240 pounds of pure muscle and barely contained violence, stood over the old black man eating alone. Razor didn't yell, he didn't flip the tray. He just leaned down, grinned, and poured the old man's water over his rice and beans, letting it soak into the meal. Then, as if that wasn't enough, he spat into it. "Looks like you lost your appetite, old-timer," Razor hissed. "Either eat that or you don't eat at all." The old man, 68-year-old James "Jimmy" Williams, didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He simply set down his spoon, wiped his mouth with deliberate calm and looked up. His eyes held no fear, only a deep, ancient knowing. "Young man," Jimmy said quietly, his voice carrying despite the whisper, "I've been sitting in uncomfortable seats for 68 years. This one's just fine." The room held its breath. Razor had no idea what he'd just done. He had no idea this quiet old man knew 23 ways to end a life, but possessed the discipline to choose none of them. What happened next would break Razor's will to fight, and it would transform an entire prison. Riverside wasn't run by guards, it was run by fear. And fear had a name: Vincent "Razor" Caruso. Razor didn't just win fights, he destroyed dignity. His pleasure was watching men break over the smallest things: food, family photos, pride. A week before Jimmy arrived, Razor cornered a young inmate named Ariel near the visitation hall. Ariel clutched a small wooden carving, a gift from his 3-year-old daughter. Razor smiled. He didn't hit Ariel. He simply took the carving and crushed it between his massive fingers. Wood splintered and fell. "Sentimental trash," Razor said coldly. "Now I own you. Every day this week you give me your dessert. Or next time, I crush more than wood." Ariel collapsed to his knees, sobbing. Guards looked away. Other inmates scattered. Razor stood over him, feeding on the despair. This was the world James Williams walked into, a place where cruelty was currency and dignity was debt. Jimmy had been sentenced to 3 years for insurance fraud, a paper crime, but his demeanor didn't match the paperwork. Upon entering Riverside, he did something only a few noticed. He bowed, not to anyone, to the prison itself, like a fighter acknowledging the arena. His cellmate, Luis, 22 and desperate to go home, watched him with fascination. "You're different from the other old heads," Luis said. "They walk in here like the world ended. You walk in like you're waiting for a bus." Jimmy smiled faintly. "The world never ends, Luis. It just changes shape." Jimmy kept his sleeves down, always. What they concealed were 5 black bands tattooed around his right forearm, thick, evenly spaced, etched into aged skin like dark rings of ancient history. To the few who knew, those rings meant something terrifying. Gokuden Master, 5th band, a warrior who had achieved absolute mastery, not over others, but over his own violence. Razor found Jimmy near the commissary line. He wanted to measure this new variable. "Grandpa," Razor called out, his voice loud and mocking. "You got swagger for an old black-timer. What kind of hustle did you run outside?" Jimmy turned slowly, hands clasped behind his back. His eyes were dark, steady, completely devoid of fear. "I ran a school, Vincent." Razor's smile faltered. The old man used his real name. That was disrespect. "I taught control," Jimmy continued. "Discipline. Respect." Razor laughed, harsh and loud. "Here we teach through pain, old man. Pain is faster than discipline." Jimmy's voice remained soft. "Pain is a reaction. Discipline is a choice. And a man who rules through pain," he paused, letting the words sink in, "is simply a slave to his own fear." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Razor's smile died. This wasn't defiance, it was something worse. The old man was unreachable, untouchable. Razor backed off, filing him away. He'd wait for the perfect moment. Maximum humiliation. Maximum audience. That moment came 3 days later in the packed cafeteria. Jimmy sat alone, eating quietly. Razor approached, his crew spreading out to block the guards' sightlines. Then it happened. Razor spat in the tray. The wet, disgusting sound cut through every conversation. 200 inmates went silent. Everyone waited for the old man to break, to beg, to submit. Jimmy's reaction was slow, deliberate, terrifying in its calm. He set down his spoon, wiped his mouth, and spoke. "This one's just fine." Razor's face twisted with rage. He slammed his hand on the table edge, making the tray jump. The impact shifted Jimmy's sleeve, just for a second. A flash of black ink, one band, maybe two. Then the sleeve dropped. One of Razor's men, Dante, saw it. His eyes went wide, his face drained of color. But Razor, blinded by humiliation, reached for Jimmy's collar. "You disrespectful!" Jimmy's left hand moved, not a punch, a flick, sharp, precise. His knuckles wrapped a nerve cluster in Razor's wrist. Razor's entire arm went instantly dead. Before he could process it, Jimmy placed his palm against Razor's chest. Not a strike, just contact, firm, exact. Razor's world exploded. He hit the floor, gasping. His diaphragm locked in spasm. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't understand why his body had betrayed him. The cafeteria erupted, shouts, chairs scraping, guards rushing in. Jimmy calmly straightened his sleeve and continued eating his defiled rice and beans. 2 guards dragged Razor to the infirmary. He was breathing again, but something inside him had cracked. Dante stood frozen, staring at the old man with pure terror in his eyes. That night, word spread like wildfire. Razor, the most feared man in Riverside, had been dropped by an old man without a single punch thrown. In Razor's cell, his crew gathered. Razor sat on his bunk, rubbing his wrist, his pride shattered. Dante finally spoke, his voice shaking. "Boss, did you see his arm?" "What arm?" Razor snapped. "When his sleeve moved. I saw ink, black bands." Razor's eyes narrowed. "So what?" "So everything." Dante's face was pale. "My father was a Marine, stationed in Okinawa. He told me stories about the Gokuden masters, old-school warriors from a code most people think is extinct." The crew leaned in. "The bands aren't belts," Dante continued. "They're marks, permanent, tattooed after you pass each level. The first 4 bands test your body, speed, strength, endurance, technique. But the 5th band..." He paused, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The 5th band tests your soul." "What does that mean?" Razor demanded. "It means you've mastered violence so completely that you no longer need it. It means you know 23 ways to kill a man, but you possess the discipline to choose none of them. A 5th bandmaster doesn't fight to win, he fights to teach." Razor's hands trembled. "You're telling me that old man could have killed me? He could have paralyzed you, blinded you, stopped your heart." Dante's voice cracked. "He chose to embarrass you instead. That's the scariest part, boss. He showed mercy." The silence in the cell was suffocating. Razor stared at his hands. For the first time in 15 years, he felt small. 2 days later, Luis cornered Jimmy in their cell. "Mr. Jimmy," Luis said carefully, "I know what you did to Razor. You're no regular criminal. Why are you really here?" Jimmy closed his worn copy of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius and sighed. "I spent 40 years teaching the Gokuden Code, Luis. Control, honor, discipline. I thought that was enough to make the world better." He paused, his voice heavy. "My grandson Kaito was 6 years old. Leukemia. The same disease that took his mother, my daughter, years ago." Luis stayed silent, listening. "The insurance company denied his treatment," Jimmy continued. "Called it a pre-existing genetic condition, said covering it wasn't a sound business decision. They valued profit over a child's life." Jimmy's jaw tightened. "I had taught discipline my whole life. But when I watched that little boy suffer because of greed, pure calculated greed, my code broke. I realized internal discipline wasn't enough to fight external evil." "So you fought back," Luis said quietly. "I defrauded them for exactly what Kaito needed. $1.2 million. I forged documents, falsified claims, became everything I taught my students not to be." Jimmy's voice cracked. "I broke the law, but I saved his life." Luis absorbed the weight of it. I broke my own code, Luis, but I did it for love. And that, Jimmy looked at his hands at the 5 dark bands on his forearm, is the only fight worth losing. Within a week, the entire prison knew about Jimmy. Big Tom, leader of the Black Crew, and Silva, leader of the Mexicans, both approached Jimmy separately, not to challenge him, to pay respect. The old-timers talk about masters like you, Big Tom said, his tone reverent. A man who can end lives but chooses peace. You have our protection. Razor's territory is done. Jimmy nodded. Razor isn't your enemy, Tom. He's just a scared boy who never learned the difference between fear and respect. Silva added, he tried to shake down one of our guys yesterday, couldn't do it. Just stood there staring at his hands. He's broken. No, Jimmy corrected. He's awake. There's a difference. Razor's crew evaporated overnight. Dante requested a transfer. Others distanced themselves. Razor was alone, his empire of fear reduced to nothing. And the worst part, he didn't know how to exist without it. But Jimmy watched. Every day in the yard, he'd see Razor sitting alone on the bleachers, staring at his hands like they belonged to someone else. The man who once commanded half the prison now couldn't even hold eye contact with the weakest inmates. One afternoon, Jimmy noticed something that made him pause mid-step. Razor was watching a basketball game, not participating, just watching. And when a younger inmate got fouled hard and fell, Razor flinched, not in fear, in empathy. The old Razor would have laughed, would have made it worse. This Razor looked away, shame crossing his face. Luis noticed Jimmy's attention. You think he's faking, playing weak until you leave? No, Jimmy said quietly. I think he's mourning. Mourning what? The man he used to be. The man he thought made him strong. Jimmy's eyes never left Razor. That's the hardest death to accept, the death of your own false identity. That night, Jimmy did something unexpected. He left a book on Razor's bunk while he was in the showers. No note, no explanation. Just a weathered copy of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations opened to a specific page. The passage was underlined. The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. When Razor returned and found it, he stood frozen for 5 full minutes, just staring at the words. He didn't know that across the cell block, Jimmy was watching through the bars, waiting to see if the seed he'd planted would take root. Razor sat on his bunk, opened the book, and for the first time in 15 years, Vincent Caruso began to read something that wasn't about survival. It was about transformation. Razor tried to reclaim his power the only way he knew how: intimidation. He found Ariel alone in the laundry room, the same young man whose daughter's carving he'd destroyed weeks ago. Razor stepped forward, ready to assert dominance, ready to feel powerful again. But then it happened. His wrist, the one Jimmy had struck, throbbed, a phantom pain, sharp, immediate. He looked down at his hand. It trembled. He heard Jimmy's voice echo in his mind. A man who rules through pain is simply a slave to his own fear. Razor froze. He looked at Ariel's terrified face. He saw himself reflected there, not power, but pathetic cruelty. The desperate need to hurt someone weaker just to feel strong. For the first time in his life, Razor felt disgust. Not at Ariel, at himself. But instead of walking away, something broke inside him. I'm sorry, Razor whispered. Ariel blinked, certain he'd misheard. What? I'm sorry. Louder this time. Razor's voice cracked. Your daughter's carving. I had no right. Ariel stood frozen, expecting a trick, a trap. But Razor just stood there, this massive man who'd terrorized him, with tears forming in his eyes. I can't give it back, Razor continued, his words tumbling out. I can't undo what I did. But I need you to know I'm sorry. He turned and walked away, leaving Ariel standing there in shock. What Razor didn't see was Jimmy, standing in the shadows of the hallway, who had witnessed the entire exchange. Jimmy smiled, small but genuine. The seed had taken root. A month passed. Razor's isolation ate at him. No crew, no respect, no fear. He was invisible. But something else was happening. He'd been reading every night. The book Jimmy left him had led to others: philosophy, history, stories of warriors who chose peace. Yet the anger still burned inside him, not at Jimmy, but at the wasted years, at the man he'd been, at the reputation he could never escape. Desperation and rage drove him to the prison library where Jimmy liked to organize books no one read. Razor came alone. This time he brought a sharpened toothbrush, a shiv, tucked in his waistband. "Just you and me, old man," Razor said, his voice shaking, not with rage, but with something worse: shame, grief, confusion. No pressure points, no tricks, just steel. Jimmy looked up from his book and sighed, not with disappointment, but with understanding. "Vincent," he said, using the real name again, "do you know why I earned the 5th band? Not because I could beat anyone, because I learned to beat myself. I learned that rage is just fear wearing a mask." Razor's hand moved to the shiv. "Your philosophy doesn't change what you did to me." "What I did?" Jimmy closed his book slowly, his movements deliberate. "I showed you mercy. You came to humiliate me and I responded by refusing to destroy you, and now you hate me for it. You made me weak," Razor shouted, his voice breaking. Jimmy stood, facing him without fear. "No, Vincent, I showed you that you were always weak. Strength isn't terrorizing men smaller than you. Strength isn't making children cry. Real strength." Jimmy stepped closer, his voice dropping to something almost tender, "is looking at yourself in the mirror and choosing to become someone different." "I don't know how," Razor screamed, and the raw desperation in his voice echoed through the empty library. "Yes, you do," Jimmy said quietly. "You apologized to Ariel. I saw you. That took more courage than any fight you've ever won." Razor's eyes widened. You saw. I've been watching you, Vincent. Reading, thinking, trying. You're not the same man who spat in my food, but you're still carrying him on your back and he's too heavy. It's time to put him down." Razor pulled the shiv, but his hand was shaking so badly he could barely hold it. "Fight me," he screamed. "Give me a reason. Give me something I understand." Jimmy's voice was calm, almost sad. "You're not my enemy, Vincent. You're barely my inconvenience." And that's when Razor lunged. "Hit the subscribe button and let me know where you are watching from." The blade passed inches from Jimmy's ribs. He pivoted, minimal movement. His hand guided Razor's wrist past his body, then released. No strike, no retaliation, just redirection. Razor stumbled, caught himself, spun, slashed again. Step, pivot, redirect. The blade cut only air. "Fight me!" Razor screamed again, his voice raw with desperation. "Why won't you fight me?" Jimmy's voice remained steady, a quiet anchor in the chaos. "Because you're not trying to kill me, Vincent. You're trying to kill the man you used to be. And I won't help you commit that murder. He needs to die on his own." Razor's next slash was wild, uncontrolled. Jimmy sidestepped, and Razor crashed into a bookshelf. Books tumbled down around him like the walls of his old identity crumbling. He stood there, chest heaving, the shiv trembling in his hand. And then he broke. The weapon clattered to the floor. Razor dropped to his knees, tears streaming down his face. Tears of rage, humiliation, and something deeper. Grief for the man he'd wasted decades becoming. Jimmy crouched beside him. He placed a hand on Razor's shoulder, not threatening, almost fatherly. "You want me to hurt you because pain is easier than truth," Jimmy said softly. "But I won't give you that escape." Razor sobbed, his massive frame shaking. "You have 50 years ahead of you, Vincent. You can spend them being feared, and fear dies the moment you do, or you can spend them being respected. Respect lives forever." Jimmy stood, leaving Razor on his knees among the fallen books. "The choice," Jimmy said as he walked away, "was always yours." For a long time, Razor stayed there, surrounded by books and broken pride. Then slowly he began picking up the volumes he'd knocked down, one by one, putting things back together, starting with the library. Then, maybe, with himself. 3 months later. Jimmy sat at a picnic table in the yard, teaching origami to a small group of inmates. His sleeves were rolled up now, the 5 bands visible, a quiet challenge to the old order. Vincent sat among the students. No longer Razor, just Vincent. His sneer was gone. He looked younger, calmer. Big Tom approached, concern on his face. "Jimmy, we got a situation. New kid, name's Leo. Some of Razor's old crew are trying to shake him down. They're testing Vincent. If he doesn't respond, the kid gets hurt. If he fights back, he loses everything he's gained." Jimmy looked at Vincent, who was carefully folding a paper crane. "Send Leo to Vincent," Jimmy said, "and tell Vincent a true master teaches, he doesn't fight." Vincent saw the confrontation from across the yard. 3 of his old crew had the terrified Leo backed against a wall. The leader, a thug named Jax, was demanding the kid's commissary money. Jack spotted Vincent watching. He grinned loud and mocking. "Hey, Vincent, your boy's about to pay for your retirement plan. What are you going to do? Fold us a paper crane?" The crew laughed. Vincent's fists clenched. Every muscle in his body screamed to charge, to fight, to reclaim respect through violence. But then he saw Leo's face. The terror, the helplessness. He'd seen that face before, on Ariel, on every victim he'd ever made. He remembered Jimmy's palm on his chest, the silence, the shame. Vincent took a deep breath and walked forward, but he didn't raise his fists. "Jax," Vincent said, his voice quiet but firm, eerily similar to Jimmy's. "That boy is under my protection," Jax sneered. "Oh yeah? What are you going to do about it, old man's pet?" Vincent didn't blink. "You want his money? Fine. But first, you buy his meals for a week. That's the code now." The yard went quiet. "Code?" Jax laughed. "What code? You've gone soft, Razor." "I'm not Razor anymore," Vincent said, stepping closer. "Not aggressive, just present. Unmovable. And you have a choice, Jax. You can take his money and make an enemy, or you can walk away and keep your respect." Jax searched Vincent's eyes for the old violence, the old fear. He found nothing but calm certainty. "You can have fear," Vincent said, echoing Jimmy's words perfectly, "or you can have peace. You don't get both." Jax hesitated. The power dynamic had shifted in a way he didn't understand. Finally, he shoved the money back at Leo and walked away, muttering curses. Leo stared at Vincent in shock. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," Vincent said, turning away. "Thank the man who taught me." Jimmy's release day arrived. The entire yard turned out, not because they had to, because they needed to honor what he'd built, a transformation none of them thought possible. Vincent stood at the front of the crowd, holding a cardboard box. As Jimmy approached the gate, Vincent stepped forward. "Master," Vincent said, and the word carried weight. Not servitude, but deep respect. "I made something for you." He opened the box. Inside were 1,000 paper cranes, each one carefully folded. Each one a day Vincent had chosen peace over violence. "One for every day you've been here," Vincent said, his voice thick with emotion. "Each one is a choice I made because of what you taught me. They're symbols of healing." Jimmy accepted the box with both hands. He bowed, not the shallow nod of politeness, but a deep, formal bow of equals. "You taught yourself, Vincent," Jimmy said. "I just refused to be your enemy." One by one, other inmates came forward, each with their own crane, their own symbol. Luis, Ariel, Big Tom, Silver, even some of the guards. The pile grew until it covered the ground around Jimmy's feet, a sea of paper peace. Jimmy turned back one final time and bowed to the prison itself. The same gesture he'd made upon entering, and this time 100 men, guards included, bowed back. As the gates closed behind him, Jimmy Williams walked into the sunlight carrying 1,000 paper cranes, and the knowledge that true strength isn't about how many people fear you. It's about how many people you set free. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't defeating your enemy. It's helping your enemy become your student. An old man with 5 black bands around his arm walked into a prison filled with violence and walked out, leaving peace in his wake. He arrived a criminal. He left a master. If this story moved you, hit subscribe for more stories of hidden strength, quiet power, and the kind of courage that doesn't need to shout.